This episode of 50 Shades of Planning is brought to you in partnership with Kratos Group. We are a leading communications consultancy, helping some of the UK's best-known brands deliver local and national campaigns, manage political and reputational risks, and influence national policy on some of the most important issues facing the UK. Find out more at kratos.co.uk.
Hello viewers, Sam Stafford here. Listeners of the 50 Shades of Planning podcast might recall that for episode 6, I published a chat with Euan Mills, then of the Connected Places Catapult, on the potential for digital innovation, urban data, and user-centered design to improve the planning system. Euan, now CEO and co-founder of Blocktype, got in touch with me earlier this year and asked if he could put together an episode on the progress that has been made over the past 5 years towards this aim. The episode that Euan put together, which was number 127 of the podcast, features 4 conversations that he recorded back in March with 4 people, both very knowledgeable and very active in this space. This video features Euan's conversation with Dr Sue Chadwick, who is Strategic and Digital Planning Advisor at Pinsent Masons. Enjoy.
Sue, thanks very much for joining us. It's great to have a planning lawyer digital. Would you mind just kind of telling the audience a little bit about a little bit about yourself and why is kind of planning law relevant when we talk about digital transformation?
Okay, background, planning lawyer, but all in local government. So Cambridge City, North Yorkshire County, and then big bad private sector. Started getting interested in digital planning back in 2017 with the National Digital Britain, but then did a research fellowship with the ODI on digital planning. And why planning is a legal issue is that the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill has the first ever legislation for data standards, among other things.
So tell us, tell the audience, what does it, does it say anything that's likely to have any impact?
It's really difficult to say because you've got a number of different sections. One of them saying that the government will be able to mandate data standards. One of them apparently saying that the government will be able to mandate planning software as well. It seems to have some kind of control over that. And also, sort of buried in different parts of LURA, there's separate legislation about data standards for compulsory purchase, and they have been brought in the last couple of weeks. So the government could tomorrow do a consultation on data standards and compulsory data, compulsory purchase data. And nobody really has yet any idea what that will be, although there's so many data standards hanging around at the moment. So it could be massive or it could be nothing. It's very difficult to say. But I think it could be big because the government's also recently started consultations on a different part of the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill completely. But that one is about disclosing property interests. And it's quite significant disclosure, not just of what you own, but what you might own under an option agreement or a contract of sale. And that is clearly information that they're going to scoop up and hold with the land registry. And I just see all of these things coming together as quite a big data grab by the public sector, possibly for us all to access as a massive amount of property data.
And you think, is that like it? Who's that going to impact? You think? There's lots of different bits of information, different data, but in general, who are the people that are going to have to do most work, or who are the people who are going to have to kind of be most aware of this legal kind of the changes to this kind of the legal framework around the way that we kind of process planning information?
Well, if the government brings in data standards, we're all going to have to get good at that, aren't we? Because it'll affect everybody. It will affect developers putting in applications. It will affect local authorities determining applications. And then if we do have some great database of property interests, it will affect the public who want to make representations. And then, of course, separately, we've got the Building Safety Act and the Golden Thread, and those regulations came in earlier this year as well. So that's a separate massive obligation on local authorities to maintain and developers to maintain this thread of data.
So I mean, historically, kind of, I guess planning legislation has dealt with planning information, right? There's kind of things around how you validate planning applications and the way that we kind of manage information. So what's different now than say 3-4 years ago in the legislation?
Well, we've got legislation. I mean, 3 or 4 years ago, it was just a twinkle in the government's eye, and lots of things happened to Lura before it became law. We've had some big profile cases about, misinformation in technology. We're all much more aware now of the risks to do with technology. With algorithms, since 3 or 4 years ago, we've had the scandal about the AI and the marking of A levels. There's a much more public awareness of data issues. Sadly, not a great leap forward in public trust, and not a huge amount of stuff we can hang on to in the sense of what we actually know what's going on. But generally, I think if you say is data relevant, if you'd said that to a planning practitioner 5 years ago, they'd have said what a number of people here said, which is after my retirement, not now. Nobody's going to be saying that today.
Because you think so that there's been a significant change now in the legal framework, that people are going to have to be paying a lot more attention to data and to digital in a way that they haven't had to before.
Yeah, and they're aware of the risks in the way they weren't before.
So what are the risks, and who are the risks for? I mean, is it local authorities? Is it the property development kind of industry? Is it government? Like, because you've talked about kind of this new power where government set data standards. Can you talk a little bit about what that actually means?
I wish I could. I think there are something like 350 different data standards, even for property. But generally, a data standard is a way of that everybody agrees how information is to be governed in a process. So it could be simply saying you must, if you're submitting data to this platform, you must make sure that it's one of the following types. That's the really most basic data standard, isn't it? Or you could say, if you're going to submit data to this platform, or then we want to know that you've done a risk impact assessment on it. If you're going, or we could even say, if you're going to submit data to this platform, we need to know that you're not going to monetize it, that you're not going to take data off and monetize it. Or if you are going to monetize it, you'll have a public benefit. There are all kinds of things you can put in a data standard, and it would be really good, wouldn't it, if we just had one place in government saying, this is what it is, stick to it, impose it.
The Lura talks about kind of open data licensing agreements, things like that. What does it, I mean, planning information already open data in some way?
It is, of course, and I think there's going to be some really interesting discussions in this area, because you do have traditionally very poor quality but public data in planning authorities. We all know the problems with non-machine readable PDFs. So everything's open, but it's not very usable. And then at the other end, I think you've got something like the National Underground Asset Register, where they're clearly developing a very sophisticated data hub that will be extremely useful to use, but it looks like you're going to pay for that data if you want to be able to use it and access it. So there's going to be some technical, financial, and ethical decisions to be made about who gets what data, what quality it is, and whether or not you get to pay for it. And that's going to be an interesting one.
So are you suggesting that the government seems to be having kind of different approaches to built environment data? I won't say planning data through different kind of arms.
Very different. I mean, if you look at the Building Safety Act, there's a very wide obligation on what you store, how you store it, how accessible it is to the public, and how widely that has to be protected and disseminated. None of that seems to be stuff that is, it looks as though it's all going to be free. If nothing, there's an obligation to publish and no cost. And at the other end, you do have something like National Underground Asset Register, where there does appear to be an intention to monetize access to that data. And I'm not saying whether those things are right and wrong, but it's quite a divergent approach, but probably good reason.
I guess today we already have obviously kind of ordnance survey data and land registry data that's kind of monetized in different ways, maybe local authorities. Do you envisage there being kind of, when it comes specifically to Lura and this idea of open, the idea that planning data is going to be open, do you think we'll be seeing similar types of kind of arrangements, or do you think we're looking at a slightly different type of way that we access kind of planning data?
I think it'd be really difficult to make planning data non-open because you've got wider obligations. You've got the environmental information regulations and you've got the INSPIRE regulations, both of which impose very wide obligations on local authorities to make data freely available. So I think the possibility of monetizing planning data, I can't see that being very successful. It's when I think people have done sophisticated things with data and produced a really usable tool that people will be more comfortable with the idea of paying for it.
Laura seems to mention something about copyright. Now, copyright kind of, I mean, I'm trained as an architect, and I'm kind of quite I guess kind of quite precious about kind of my architectural drawings and my designs and things like that. And how does the planning system today deal with information and copyright? And do you think that's likely to change?
I don't think it will change much. I think, if anything, those LURA provisions basically say that the law isn't going to change because the use of this data will not infringe copyright. So we're stuck with the situation that we have now, which is that, yeah, if you've made a really good innovative design, there is every chance somebody can have a look at it, though whether or not they have access to the detailed workings of but then of course that brings us into large language models, doesn't it? And whether or not any of us are going to have much creative capacity in the future.
I mean, let's move into that, right? So over the last kind of few, I mean, it's I guess a year or it's months, really, the speed at which we're seeing all this kind of, I'm going to group them under AI innovations, right? Do you think that changes anything? How does that change, particularly when we're talking about planning data and the legislation?
Yeah. Okay. So I did a couple of things when it first came out. I asked it to write a policy. It was just ChatGPT, very basic large language model, quite a long time ago, in AI terms, a year ago. And I said, write a policy on digital connectivity. And in 20 seconds, it had written a really, really good policy on digital connectivity. And I think anybody that thinks that kind of grunt work of drafting basic policies couldn't be done by AI is wrong, because it very clearly can, because it will look around the world and see what everybody else has done and come up with a really good summary. But what I thought was interesting about that policy was it said that this will need to be consulted on widely with the public. And I thought, well, that's the point, isn't it? That AI isn't going to do the human job. And that's why I'm quite positive about it, because if we can identify those parts of planning where it's quite useful to have somebody do that very basic first draft, that saves a month of passing words between various planning officers, and it means those same planning officers have more time to do the consultation and listen to the people. Where I'd be much more worried is if you then got AI to not only do the consultation exercise, but then sift all the responses and come up with its version of what it thought the consultation was. That's when you get into the area where I think there'll be ethical and legal issues, because you're asking it to do the human job of judgment and analysis.
So that's interesting, because sometimes like a local authority might get thousands of comments, and I think one of the potential opportunities of AI is to be able to sift that and interpret that. That raises talk about kind of what are the issues that raises, and is there a way to overcome these issues?
Yeah. Well, I would say that the ISO last week issued guidance on content moderation and what you can and can't do with content moderation. And I think anybody that's involved in planning knows it can be highly contentious and occasionally abusive, and we do turn into content moderators by definition. And I think it's really important to be aware of things happening in the world of digital regulation that we think don't affect us, but actually might. And then to do what they say, which is to be very clear if you are using AI to sift content, to allow for a human in the loop, to make sure that if anybody's uncomfortable with this, that they have a right to explanation. And transparency is absolutely your friend, which is why I will say what I've been saying in every local authority context, which is if you are adopting or using software, please somewhere make a record of that decision in the way you would for any other planning decision.
Yeah.
Because I think otherwise you have two risks. Firstly, that we adopt ever more and more complex AI without being accountable to the public. But as individual officers, expose ourselves to individual liability by not making that a corporate decision.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. I mean, I assume the LURA, before it was the bill, the LURB, so that was written before a lot of these AI innovations came in.
Yeah.
Do you think now, looking at the technological landscape, do you think there's any major gaps in legislation? If you were if you could kind of go back in time or edit legislation or change it in some particular way, whether it's about AI itself or whether it's something else that you think government might be kind of missing a shot to try and create a good kind of technological landscape in the planning world?
If I was writing Laura now, I would include a clause that said when a local authority is making a decision to adopt or procure software, it must make a record of that decision with reasons. Simply that, so that we start having. I mean, we've got now a transparency register for use of algorithms. There's all kinds of really good stuff popping up, but there's no central recognition that we need this, and there's no adopted community of practice within local authorities. And I would like to see that happen for everybody's sake.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. That's very interesting. So kind of, I'm going to ask you kind of two questions in one a little bit. Like if we were to look at the near future, say the next 5 years, how do you think the world's going to be different? And then if you could then extrapolate in the next, say, 25 years, and I'm asking you to predict the future. I know that's, well, whatever you say is probably going to be wrong, but maybe in 5 years' time, we'll be able to do another one of these podcasts and we can go back and look at our predictions.
I think we will see large language models doing the basic work that we all know when we get in the morning. There's some stuff we do that's entirely routine that we can do with half a brain cell while we've got a hangover. That stuff will be done by AI. But on the other hand, we all know that there are some, again, in our jobs, there are complex issues to think about, and people are eternally complex and always need another human to understand them. So I think we will see automation deal with administrative processes, basic drafting, and a lot of environmental analysis. And a utopian future, I think for me, this is I suppose I won't go as far as 25 years, but a utopian future in 10 years, rather than everybody rocking up with a whole load of boxes to a planning inquiry. At the pre-inquiry meeting or before any big planning decision, everybody would agree on a data standard. And I don't just mean that on the JPEG or whatever, that I would mean that the actual governance. And then you all agree where you will source your environmental information from. And by that point, we'll have a universal source of information for environmental issues like air quality, blood risk, all of that stuff will be agreed. And then some part of that inquiry involves modeling those environmental risks so that people can make human decisions based on the best quality of data without wasting time arguing. I guess a dystopian 10-year vision would be we rock up to a planning inquiry and spend 3 years, 3 months arguing about which algorithmic model was used and which one was better. I hate to think we would do that, but that's my dystopia, if you like. A whole lot of barristers saying, no, those are the flaws, and no, yours model is very opaque, but mine is biased. And, oh my God, please no.
I can imagine kind of all the reports being written in ChatGPT, all the images being produced with things like Midjourney, and no one was actually kind of heavily involved in anything, and no one quite understands how it works. So there is this risk, isn't there, that things get so complex. And I guess kind of your point is we need to find a way to understand it, to keep a record of these decisions, to understand, because I guess the complexity of all this is going to exponentially become more and more complex, right? As we've been seeing kind of the recent trends. So that's super useful. Is there anything else that we haven't talked about that you think would be important for a kind of a planning audience to think about or to know about?
Please think about your cameras. The ICO has just sanctioned Serco in 7 different places for use of unauthorized use of facial recognition technology on employees. Now, I don't know how many local authorities are thinking about using this technology in public spaces. That is something that's extremely high risk in ethical terms. It's not impossible to do, but you shouldn't do it without assessing the risks in a very specific way. And also with cameras, think about procurement of the hardware. The government last year stopped using any cameras with Hikvision technology in them across the public estate for various ethical concerns, which you can find out about by simply searching on the statement that was made by Oliver Dowden. those ethical concerns about the hardware in those cameras is something I think that's relevant to local authority estates as well. So cameras. If you think about nothing else, think about your cameras.
So if we're going to be using cameras to measure footfall, to collect data for
absolutely
all that kind of stuff, we really have to be thinking about. It's great the fact that
the
we can
ethics
do the
of
stuff.
them.
We have to think about how we do that.
And the good news is that the Information Commission has really good advice both on the CCTV passive imaging and the FRT facial recognition technology stuff. So you read it, please.
Great stuff, Sue. Thank you very much.
Hello, viewers. Sam again. My thanks to Euan and Sue for letting me share that conversation with you. Look out for the other 3, which I will share on here as well. They feature conversations between Euan and Alistair Parvin, CEO of Open Systems Lab, Matt Woodhill, Head of Digital Planning Software at MHCLG, and Paul Downey, Planning Data Service Owner at MHCLG. Please do keep in mind, viewers, that 50 Shades of Planning is by planners and for planners. And so if you would like to use this channel for sharing anything you think that we need to be talking about, then do please feel free to get in touch with me via samstafford@hotmail.com. My thanks to podcast partners Kratos, and a shout out especially to Luca Di Fato for production support. What have we learnt? Well, town and country planning is very much not a black and white endeavour. There are at least 50 shades in between. Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to this episode of 50 Shades of Planning, which is brought to you in partnership with Kratos. Kratos are a leading communications consultancy providing integrated strategic communications and campaigns across multiple sectors. We have helped some of the UK's best-known brands deliver local and national campaigns, manage political and reputational risks, and influence national policy on some of the most important issues facing the UK. We are more than an agency, we are change makers. Find out more at kratos.co.uk.